are stories whispered along the rocky coasts of Scotland and Ireland, tales that drift on the salt wind and settle into the bones of anyone who listens. Stories about creatures who are not quite seal and not quite human, who walk the line between two worlds with grace and sorrow. They call them Selkies. And this is the story of one such soul, a tale of love and loss, of freedom and sacrifice, told in the voice of the ancient tides. Close your eyes and listen. Let the sound of the waves carry you to a time when magic still walked the shores and the sea held secrets that could break your heart. Long ago, before the world grew loud and the shores grew crowded, there lived a young Selkie named Mairi. She was born beneath the waves, where shafts of sunlight painted the kelp forests in gold and green, where schools of silverfish moved like living clouds, and where the songs of whales echoed through the deep like ancient prayers. Mairi's childhood was one of endless wonder. She swam with her brothers and sisters through underwater caves adorned with coral and starfish. She learned to hunt from her mother, chasing herring through the shallows with speed and grace. She listened to the elders tell stories of the old days, when Selkies and humans danced together on the beaches under the full moon, when the boundary between land and sea was softer, more forgiving. But even as a young seal, Mairi was curious about the world above. She would surface often, floating on her back in the moonlight, watching the stars wheel overhead. She wondered what it would be like to walk on two legs, to feel grass beneath her feet, to breathe air that tasted of heather and peat smoke instead of salt and seaweed. Her mother warned her. "The land is beautiful," she would say, her voice low and serious, "but it is not for us. Our hearts belong to the sea. Those who forget this are lost forever." Mairi listened, but the longing never left her. On the other side of the water, in a small fishing village pressed against the cliffs, lived a young man named Ewan. He was the son of a fisherman and the grandson of a fisherman before that, part of a long line of people who had made their lives from the sea's bounty and its mercy. Ewan's days began before dawn, when the sky was still purple and the stars were fading. He would row his small boat out into the cold waters, cast his nets, and wait. Sometimes the sea was generous, sometimes it was cruel, but always Ewan respected it, knew that his life was held in its ancient, indifferent hands. He lived alone in a stone cottage at the edge of the village, a place that smelled of salt and wood smoke, and the herbs his grandmother had once grown in pots by the window. His grandmother had been a storyteller, and on long winter nights she would tell him tales of the Selkies, of magical seals who could shed their skins and walk as humans, of love and longing, and the terrible choices that came with both. Ewan had always thought they were just stories. Beautiful, yes. Haunting, certainly. But only stories. Until the night he saw them. It was a warm evening in late spring, the kind of night when the air is soft and the world feels suspended between seasons. Ewan had been out late, checking his nets one last time before heading home. As he rowed back toward shore, he heard something strange carried on the wind. Laughter. Not the rough laughter of the men at the village tavern, but something lighter, more musical, like bells or bird song, or the chiming of wind through hollow reeds. Curious, Ewan followed the sound. He rowed quietly around a rocky outcrop and into a hidden cove he had passed 1,000 times, but never truly noticed. And there, in the silver light of the moon, he saw them. 7 seals rested on the black rocks, their bodies sleek and shining. But as he watched, one of them stood upright and reached for its own skin. The seal pelt slipped away like a cloak, and beneath it stood a woman, pale and beautiful, her hair falling like dark water down her back. One by one, the other seals did the same. They shed their skins and became women, laughing and calling to each other in a language Ewan did not understand. They dove into the water, spinning and dancing, their joy so pure it made his chest ache. Ewan could not move. He could not breathe. He sat in his boat, hidden in the shadow of the rocks, and watched. One of the women surfaced near him. She had eyes as deep and dark as the ocean itself, and when she looked at him, Ewan felt as though she could see straight through to his soul. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, Then she smiled, a strange, wild smile, and dove beneath the water. Ewan sat there long after the women returned to the rocks, pulled on their sealskins, and slipped back into the sea. He sat there until the stars began to fade and the sky turned the color of ash. And then, against every warning his grandmother had ever given him, he made a choice. He rowed back to the cove. The next night and the night after that, Ewan returned to the hidden cove. He watched the Selkies from a distance, his heart full of longing and wonder. The woman with the dark eyes was always there, and every time she seemed to know he was watching. She would glance toward the shadows where he hid, and something in her gaze made him feel seen in a way he had never felt before. On the third night, Ewan arrived early and hid among the rocks. When the Selkies came, he watched them shed their skins and dive into the water. And when they were far enough away, he crept forward. There, on the stone, lay 7 seal skins, soft and shimmering in the moonlight. Ewan's hand trembled as he reached for one. He knew which one it was. He didn't know how, but he did. He took it and ran. He ran all the way back to his cottage, the skin clutched to his chest, his heart hammering with guilt and desire. He climbed up to the attic and buried it beneath a pile of old fishing nets, boards, and forgotten things. Then he sat by the fire and waited. The knock came just after midnight, soft, hesitant. Ewan opened the door. She stood there, shivering in the cold night air, her hair wet and tangled, her eyes wide with desperation. She was naked, vulnerable, and utterly lost. Ewan knew what she wanted, but he said nothing. He stepped aside and let her in. He gave her a blanket. He stoked the fire. He made tea, though she did not drink it. She sat by the hearth, staring into the flames, her arms wrapped around herself, as though trying to hold her own body together. Finally, Ewan spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "I cannot give it back." She looked at him then, and he saw something break in her eyes, but she said nothing. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Without her skin, Mairi was trapped on land, bound to her human form. She moved through Ewan's cottage like a ghost at first, silent and distant. But slowly, she began to adapt. She learned his language. She learned to cook the fish he brought home. She learned to smile, though the smiles never quite reached her eyes. Ewan called her Mairi. It was not her real name. He did not know her real name, but she did not correct him. The villagers were curious about the strange woman who had appeared in Ewan's life, but they asked few questions. In a place where the sea could take as easily as it gave, mysteries were respected. In time, Ewan and Mairi were married. The ceremony was simple, held in the small stone chapel that overlooked the sea. When the priest asked if Mairi spoke her vows willingly, she nodded. But Ewan saw the way her gaze drifted toward the window, toward the water, and a seed of doubt took root in his heart. They had children. First a daughter, Ayla, with dark hair and eyes that shone like tide pools. Then a son, Neil, quieter and more thoughtful, who loved stories and spent hours watching the waves. Mairi was a devoted mother. She sang to her children in a language they did not understand, songs that made the seabirds gather on the roof and the fish leap in the bay. She told them stories of the sea, of magical creatures who lived beneath the waves, of underwater kingdoms where coral towers glowed with their own light. Ayla and Neil loved their mother fiercely, but even as children they sensed something in her, a sadness that lingered just beneath the surface, a longing that no amount of love could ever fully erase. At night, Ewan would sometimes wake to find Mairi standing at the window, staring out at the moonlit water, her hand pressed against the glass. On those nights, he would lie awake and wonder if he had done the right thing, if love built on theft could ever truly be love at all. The years passed. Isla grew tall and strong, with a love for the sea that rivaled her mother's. She learned to swim like an otter, to read the tides, to sense storms before they arrived. Neil became a storyteller like his great-grandmother. weaving tales that made people laugh and cry. But Mairi grew quieter. She still smiled, still sang, still held her children close. But there were days when she would walk to the cliffs and stand at the edge, so close that Ewan's heart would stop. There were nights when he would hear her weeping softly, and he did not know how to comfort her. The villagers spoke in whispers of the seal woman who had brought blessings to their shores. Fish were more plentiful, storms were gentler, children were healthier. But they also spoke of the way she would disappear for hours, only to be found sitting on the rocks, singing to the seals that gathered in the bay. One autumn, when Isla was 10 years old, she asked her mother, "Where did you come from?" Mairi looked at her daughter for a long time. Then, very quietly, she said, "From the sea." Isla did not understand, but she never forgot. It was Isla who found the skin. She had been playing in the attic on a rainy afternoon, searching for treasures among the dust and cobwebs. Hidden beneath a pile of old nets and boards, she found something soft, something that shimmered faintly even in the dim light. She pulled it free and carried it downstairs. "Mama, what is this?" Mairi was kneading bread at the table. Her hands froze. She turned slowly, and when she saw what Isla was holding, all the color drained from her face. She crossed the room in 3 steps and took the skin from her daughter's hands, holding it against her chest as though it were a living thing. "Where did you find this?" she whispered. "In the attic," Isla said, confused. "What is it?" But Mairi was no longer listening. She looked at the skin. She looked at her children. She looked at Ewan, who had just walked through the door and now stood frozen, his face pale with dread. And then she looked toward the sea. That night, Mairi did not sleep. She sat by her children's beds, watching them breathe. She touched Isla's hair, so like her own. She kissed Neil's forehead, memorizing the shape of his face. She whispered to them in the old language, words of blessing and love and farewell. When dawn came, she walked to the door. Ewan followed her. They stood together on the cliff, the wind pulling at their clothes, the sea stretching endless before them. "Mairi," Ewan said, his voice breaking. "Please." She turned to face him. There were tears in her eyes, but also something like relief. "I loved them," she said softly. "I loved them so much it hurt." "I know, but I was never meant to stay." Ewan wanted to beg. He wanted to fall to his knees and plead with her not to go. But he didn't, because he knew. He had always known. She stepped forward and kissed him, once, gently. A goodbye. Then she turned and walked down the path to the shore. Ewan watched her go. Isla and Neil stood beside him, their small hands clutching his. Mairi reached the water's edge and pulled the sealskin over her shoulders. It melted into her, not like cloth, but like something that had always been part of her. Her body shifted. Her legs fused. Her hair darkened and became sleek. And then she dove into the waves. Ewan stood there until the sun rose fully, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. But Mairi did not come back. The children asked about their mother. Ewan did not know what to say, but Isla understood. She had always understood, even when she was too young to name it. One morning, she stood on the rocks by the shore and saw a seal with dark, knowing eyes watching her. The seal held her gaze for a long moment, and then it dove beneath the water. Isla knew. Years passed. The village remembered Mairi as a blessing, a mystery, a story told on cold winter nights. Isla grew into a woman who could speak to the sea, who carried her mother's songs in her heart. Neil traveled far, collecting stories, always searching for the magic his mother had whispered about. And Ewan grew old, but he never stopped walking the shore at twilight, watching for a silver shape in the waves. They say that on quiet nights, when the moon is full and the tide is high, you can still hear singing. A woman's voice, carried on the wind, sad and beautiful and full of longing. And if you stand on the shore and listen closely, you might see a seal with dark eyes, watching from the water, keeping vigil over the family she loved and the world she could never fully leave behind. This is the legend of the Selkies, the seal folk who walk between worlds, forever caught between love and freedom, longing and belonging. And it is a reminder that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone you love is let them go. Sleep now, let the waves carry you, and know that somewhere, out in the deep, the Selkies are still singing.